The morning sky over the Nevada test range stretched endlessly blue, broken only by the contrails of six F-22 Raptors maintaining perfect formation at 35,000 feet. What none of the pilots knew was that their routine training exercise was about to become the most documented mystery in modern military aviation history. Phoenix Lead, this is Viper Control. You have an unidentified aircraft approaching your position from the southeast, bearing 170 degrees, range 20 miles and closing fast. The radio crackled with the controlled urgency that only comes from air traffic controllers who have seen something that shouldn't exist. Captain Marcus Blade Torres, leading the formation in his F-22, squinted through his canopy. The morning sun painted everything in gold, but there, a glint of metal where no aircraft should be. His HUD showed empty airspace, yet his eyes told a different story. Viper Control, Phoenix Lead. Negative contact on radar. Repeat, negative contact. Phoenix Lead, visual confirmation of unknown aircraft. Single engine, appears to be vintage configuration. Aircraft is not squawking and not responding to radio calls. The controller's voice carried a note of bewilderment that made Tor's stomach tighten. Lieutenant Sarah Wraith Chen, flying wing position, was the first to spot it clearly. Through her helmet's visor, she watched an aircraft that defied explanation materialize from the morning haze. It wasn't just old, it was ancient. The sleek lines of a P-51 Mustang, polished aluminum gleaming like liquid mercury, flying with a precision that made her F-22 feel clumsy by comparison. "Holy shit," whispered Lieutenant Jake Razor Williams over the comm, forgetting protocol entirely. "That's a World War II fighter." The Mustang maintained perfect formation position, as if it belonged there, as if 70 years of aviation evolution meant nothing. Its propeller carved through the thin air with a sound that somehow reached them even through their sealed cockpits, a ghostly whisper of pistons and cylinders that spoke of a different era of warfare. But it was Captain Torres who noticed the detail that would haunt him for years to come. Banking slightly to get a better view, he caught sight of the aircraft's wing insignia. Not the standard roundel of the United States Air Force, but something else entirely. Something that made his blood run cold. "Phoenix Lead to Viper Control," he said, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. "I need you to patch me through to Historical Aviation Command immediately. We have a situation here that's going to require some very specific answers." The Mustang continued its flight, seemingly oblivious to the six of the world's most advanced fighters surrounding it, carrying secrets that would unravel everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the price of honor in war. Lieutenant Kira Ghost Volkov sat in the cockpit of the P-51 Mustang, her hands steady on the controls despite the tremor that ran through her entire body. She hadn't expected to find other aircraft in the sky, least of all the sleek, angular fighters that now flanked her like metallic angels of death. The radio in her headset crackled with unfamiliar call signs and technical jargon that seemed to belong to a different century. Her uniform bore the patches of the 99th Fighter Squadron, the legendary Red Tails, but something was wrong with the details. The fabric looked too new, the insignia too pristine, as if they'd been carefully recreated rather than earned through combat. Yet the way she flew the Mustang spoke of hundreds of hours in the cockpit, of muscle memory built through countless missions over hostile territory. Unknown aircraft, this is Phoenix Lead. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. The voice in her headset was crisp, professional, tinged with the kind of authority that comes from flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Kiera's thumb hovered over the radio transmission button. What could she say? How could she explain that she'd taken off from a base that hadn't existed for decades, carrying orders from commanders who died before these pilots were born? How could she tell them that the fuel gauge reading 3/4 full made no sense, that the engine that had been sputtering and dying when she'd last remembered being conscious was now purring like a satisfied cat? Phoenix Lead, this is. She paused, her call sign catching in her throat. This is Ghost. I'm not sure how to answer that question. The honesty in her voice seemed to surprise even her. In the cockpit of the lead Raptor, Captain Torres felt something shift in his chest. There was pain in that transmission, a weight that spoke of losses too great to quantify. It was the voice of someone who'd seen too much, lost too much, and somehow found herself in a sky that no longer made sense. Ghost, Phoenix Lead, can you tell us your point of origin, your last known position? Kiera looked down at her instruments, at the compass that pointed to magnetic north with unwavering certainty, at the fuel gauge that defied logic, at the ammunition counters that showed full loads despite the memory of empty chambers and the screaming of her wingman's death over the radio. Below them, the Nevada desert stretched in all directions, a sea of brown and tan that looked nothing like the European countryside she remembered. Phoenix Lead, Ghost. I took off from Ramitelli Airfield. Mission briefing indicated escort duty for heavy bombers over. She stopped, the words dying in her throat as she realized how insane she sounded. Over Germany. But that doesn't make sense, does it? The silence that followed was deafening. In the lead Raptor, Captain Torres felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align. Ramitelli Airfield had been the home base of the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II, closed down in 1947. The 99th Fighter Squadron had been deactivated decades ago, their legacy preserved only in museums and history books. Yet here was a pilot flying their colors, speaking their language, carrying their ghosts. Ghost, Phoenix lead. I need you to stay calm and maintain current heading. We're going to escort you to a safe landing zone. Can you tell us your aircraft type and current fuel state? Kira's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. Phoenix lead Ghost. I'm flying a P-51D Mustang, tail number 44843990. Fuel state is impossible. According to my gauge, I've got enough fuel for another 6 hours of flight, but that can't be right. I've been flying for. She paused, trying to remember. I don't know how long I've been flying. Lieutenant Chen, monitoring the conversation from her wing position, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thin air at altitude. She'd studied aviation history, knew the stories of pilots who disappeared during the war, their aircraft never found, their fates unknown. But this was different. This was a ghost story playing out in real time, witnessed by 6 of the Air Force's most elite pilots. Ghost, this is Phoenix 2, that tail number. Do you know what squadron you're assigned to? The question seemed to center Kira somehow, giving her something concrete to hold on to. Phoenix 2, Ghost. I'm assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron, 332nd Fighter Group. Red Tails, we were escorting B-17s deep into enemy territory. The bombers were taking heavy fire and my wingman. Her voice broke, the memory rushing back like a physical blow. My wingman went down, engine fire. I tried to cover him, but the Messerschmitts were everywhere. The radio fell silent except for the whisper of static. In 6 different cockpits, 6 different pilots processed information that challenged everything they understood about reality, about time, about the nature of duty and sacrifice. Captain Torres made the decision that would define the rest of his career. Ghost, Phoenix lead. I'm declaring this a priority recovery situation. All aircraft maintain escort formation. Viper Control, I need a clear approach to Nellie's Air Force Base. Priority handling for a historical aircraft recovery. Below them, the Nevada desert continued its eternal sprawl, indifferent to the drama playing out in the sky above. But in the cockpit of an impossible aircraft, a pilot who should have been dead for decades gripped her controls tighter and wondered if she was finally going home. The approach to Nellie's Air Force Base unfolded like a scene from a fever dream. Ground personnel had gathered along the flight line, word of the impossible aircraft spreading through the base like wildfire. Camera crews from Base Public Affairs raced to capture what their commanders were calling either the greatest hoax in military history or evidence of something that would rewrite the textbooks. Ghost, Phoenix lead. Nellie's tower has cleared you for immediate landing. Runway 03 left. Emergency crews are standing by as a precaution. Captain Tor's voice carried the weight of responsibility as he watched the P-51 begin its descent. The aircraft handled like it was being flown by a pilot with decades of experience. every movement precise and confident despite the impossible circumstances. Kira's hands moved over the controls with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with questions that had no answers. The landscape below looked wrong, too developed, too modern. The air traffic control tower was a gleaming structure of glass and steel that belonged in a future she'd never imagined. Even the other aircraft on the ground seemed alien, their designs so advanced they looked like props from a science fiction film. Phoenix lead Ghost. I'm going to need some help here. This doesn't look like any airfield I've ever seen. Her voice carried a tremor that spoke of a pilot holding onto control through sheer force of will. Lieutenant Chen, still flying escort, found herself studying the Mustang's pilot through her canopy. She could see the figure in the cockpit, smaller than she'd expected, the silhouette suggesting curves that military flight suits of the 1940s would have hidden. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The pilot of the Ghost aircraft was a woman. Ghost, this is Phoenix 2. Can you confirm your pilot details? Name, rank, serial number. The question seemed to anchor Kira to something solid in a world that had become quicksand. Phoenix 2 Ghost. First Lieutenant Kira Volkov. Serial number 1940-47823. I was assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron as part of the integration program. The silence that followed was profound. In the tower, air traffic controllers were frantically pulling up historical records, trying to make sense of a serial number that appeared in classified documents they weren't supposed to have access to. The name Kira Volkov appeared in exactly one file, marked with a red stamp that read "Missing in Action, Presumed Dead." Ghost, Phoenix lead. We're going to bring you in nice and easy. Once you're on the ground, we'll get some people to help you make sense of all this. Tor's voice was gentler now, the voice of someone speaking to a fellow pilot who was clearly in distress. The P-51 touched down with a precision that spoke of hundreds of combat landings, the tail wheel settling onto the tarmac with barely a bump. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, ground crews surrounded it, their faces reflecting a mixture of professional duty and barely contained awe. But it was the crew chief, Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, who noticed what the others missed. As she approached the aircraft, her trained eye caught details that made her blood run cold. The paint wasn't just pristine, it was perfect, as if the aircraft had rolled off the production line moments before. Yet the wear patterns on the control surfaces, the subtle scoring on the propeller blades, the way the leather in the cockpit had been shaped by countless hours of flight, all of it spoke of an aircraft that had seen extensive combat. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her voice lost in the roar of the ground equipment. "This isn't a replica. This is the real thing." As the engine finally wound down, the silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality, about the price of courage, and about the debts that history leaves unpaid. The canopy opened with a mechanical precision that seemed to echo across decades, and First Lieutenant Kira Volkov climbed out of the cockpit into a world that was no longer her own. The figure that emerged from the P-51's cockpit moved with the fluid grace of a combat pilot, but the face that looked out from beneath the vintage flight helmet was young, far younger than the voice on the radio had suggested. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found herself staring at a woman who couldn't have been more than 25, her dark eyes carrying a weight that seemed to belong to someone who'd lived through years of war. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, her voice carefully neutral despite the chaos in her mind. "I'm Master Sergeant Rodriguez. I'm going to need you to step away from the aircraft while we conduct a safety inspection." Kira nodded, her movements deliberate and controlled. As her boots touched the tarmac, she seemed to sway slightly, as if the solid ground beneath her feet was somehow less real than the sky she'd just left. Her uniform was immaculate, the patches and insignia of the 99th Fighter Squadron displayed with pride, but there was something about the fabric, the cut, the way it fit, that spoke of authenticity that couldn't be faked. "Sergeant," Kira said, her voice stronger now that she was on solid ground. "Where exactly am I? What year is this?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to sanity itself. Rodriguez had been briefed on the situation, had been told to expect the impossible, but hearing it spoken aloud by a pilot who looked like she'd stepped out of a 1940s recruitment poster was something else entirely. "Ma'am, this is Nelly's Air Force Base, Nevada. The date is—" Rodriguez paused, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "The date is October 15th, 2024. The blood drained from Kira's face. She took a step backward, her hand reaching instinctively for the wing of the Mustang as if the aircraft could somehow anchor her to a reality that made sense. 2024, she repeated, the words barely a whisper. That's not possible. I took off this morning. It was 1944. October 15th, 1944. The crowd of ground personnel fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a physical presence. Camera crews stopped rolling, mechanics stopped working, and for a moment the entire flight line existed in a bubble of suspended disbelief. Captain Torres had landed and was approaching the scene, his flight suit still damp with sweat from the adrenaline of the encounter. He'd dealt with pilots in crisis before, had talked men and women through emergencies that would have broken lesser souls, but this was something beyond his experience. "Lieutenant Volkov," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command tempered with genuine concern. "I'm Captain Torres. I was leading the flight that found you. I need you to understand that what you're experiencing is Unprecedented. We're going to get you medical attention, and we're going to figure out what happened to you." Kira looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through him to something else entirely. "Captain, with respect, I know what happened to me. I was shot down over Germany. My wingman was killed, and I was trying to make it back to base when everything went." She paused, her hand moving to her chest as if feeling for something that wasn't there. Everything went white. There was this sound like metal tearing, and then I was here. The silence that followed was broken by the arrival of Colonel James Mitchell, the base commander, who'd been monitoring the situation from the tower. His face was grim, the expression of a man who'd just been handed a problem that had no solution in any manual he'd ever read. "Lieutenant Volkov," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of military service. "I'm Colonel Mitchell. I think we need to have a very long conversation." In the distance, the 6 F-22 Raptors sat in perfect formation on the tarmac, their pilots still in their cockpits, still processing what they'd witnessed. None of them would ever forget the sight of that impossible aircraft, or the courage it had taken to fly it into a world that no longer existed. The debriefing room at Nellis Air Force Base had hosted thousands of post-mission interviews, but nothing in its sterile, government tissue history had prepared it for First Lieutenant Kira Volkov. She sat across from Colonel Mitchell, her posture military perfect despite the tremor in her hands that spoke of a pilot running on adrenaline and will alone. "Lieutenant, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation," Mitchell began, his voice carefully measured. "According to our records, you were reported missing in action on October 15, 1944, during a bomber escort mission over Germany. Your aircraft was never recovered, and you were presumed killed in action." Kira's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "Presumed killed in action. That's rich. I can tell you exactly what happened that day, Colonel. We were escorting a formation of B-17s deep into enemy territory. The Luftwaffe hit us hard, Messerschmitt 109s and 190s coming out of the sun. My wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Ace Washington, took a cannon shell through his engine. His aircraft caught fire, and he was trying to bail out when a 190 came in for the kill." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the memory giving her something concrete to hold on to in a world that had become quicksand. "I couldn't let that happen. I broke formation, dove on the 190 and got him clean. But there were more of them, and they were angry. I took hits in the engine and the fuel tank. The aircraft was dying, and I was trying to make it back to friendly territory when—" "When what, Lieutenant?" "When I saw something that doesn't belong in any war I've ever heard of." Her eyes met Mitchell's, and he saw something there that made his blood run cold. "There was another aircraft, Colonel. Not German, not American, not anything I'd ever seen. It was huge, triangular, and it moved without sound. When I got close to it, Everything went white, and then I was here. The silence in the room was profound. Mitchell had read the classified reports, had seen the documents that suggested the truth was far stranger than the official histories recorded. But hearing it from a pilot who'd been there, who'd seen it with her own eyes, was something else entirely. Lieutenant, I need to ask you about your background. Your service record shows some irregularities. Kira's spine stiffened. What kind of irregularities? According to the official records, the 99th Fighter Squadron was an all-male unit. The Tuskegee Airmen were pioneers in many ways, but the integration of women into combat roles didn't happen until decades later. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. She'd fought for her place in the squadron, had proved herself in combat time and again, had earned the respect of men who'd initially seen her as nothing more than a publicity stunt. The idea that history had forgotten her, had erased her contributions, was almost more painful than the impossibility of her situation. Colonel, I don't care what your records say. I was there. I flew those missions. I shot down enemy aircraft and saved American lives. The fact that some pencil-pushing bureaucrat decided to erase me from the history books doesn't change what I did. Mitchell leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. Lieutenant, I'm not questioning your service or your courage. What I'm trying to understand is how you came to be assigned to a unit that, according to every official record, never had female pilots. Kira was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the walls of the debriefing room. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. There were 6 of us, Colonel. 6 women who were selected for a classified program. We were told we were making history, that we were proving that women could fly and fight as well as any man. We were assigned to different units, different theaters, all of us sworn to secrecy. What happened to the others? I don't know. We weren't supposed to communicate with each other, weren't supposed to acknowledge the program existed. For all I know, I was the only one who survived long enough to. She paused, the impossibility of her situation crashing over her again. To end up here. Mitchell made a note on his pad, his mind racing through the implications. If Volkov was telling the truth, if there had been a classified program to integrate women into combat roles decades before the official integration, then the historical record was not just incomplete, it was deliberately falsified. Lieutenant, I need you to know that whatever happened to you, whatever brought you here, you're safe now. We're going to figure this out. Kira looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and somehow found the strength to keep fighting. Colonel, with respect, I don't think you understand. I'm not the one who needs to be kept safe. I'm the one who's been keeping others safe for the last 80 years. The medical evaluation of First Lieutenant Kira Volkov defied every principle of science and medicine, that Dr. Sarah Chen had learned in her 15 years as a flight surgeon. The woman sitting on the examination table appeared to be in her early 20s, her physical condition consistent with someone who'd been flying high-performance aircraft for several years. But the details were wrong, subtly but persistently wrong. "Lieutenant, I need you to hold still while I take some blood samples," Dr. Chen said, her voice carefully neutral. "We need to run some tests to make sure you're medically cleared for duty." Kira nodded, her eyes focused on the medical equipment that surrounded her. "Doctor, this is going to sound strange, but some of this equipment looks familiar. Not the same, but similar. Like someone took the medical gear I remember and evolved it forward." Dr. Chen paused, her hand halfway to the blood draw kit. "What do you mean?" "The stethoscope, the blood pressure cuff, even the way you're approaching the examination. It's like you're following protocols that were developed from the same basic principles we used, but refined over decades of practice." The observation was astute, almost unnervingly so. Dr. Chen had indeed been trained in methods that had evolved from 1940s military medicine, but the sophistication of modern equipment should have been completely foreign to a pilot from that era. "Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you some questions that might seem strange, but I need you to answer them as honestly as possible. When you were shot down, do you remember experiencing any unusual symptoms? Disorientation, nausea, vision problems?" Kira was quiet for a moment, her eyes focusing on something beyond the examination room walls. "Doctor, I remember everything about that day. The smell of cordite and aviation fuel, the sound of my wingman's engine dying, the way the sun felt on my face when I opened the canopy. But there was something else, something that doesn't fit." "What kind of something?" "When I approached that unknown aircraft, I felt different, like the air itself was charged with electricity. My instruments went haywire, the radio filled with static, and I could taste metal in my mouth. Then everything went white, and I felt like I was falling through time itself." Dr. Chen made notes, her scientific mind struggling to process information that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. "Lieutenant, I need to ask you about your family background. Do you have any relatives who might have served in the military?" "My grandfather served in the First World War, flew with the Lafayette Escadrille. My father was a test pilot before the war, worked on some classified projects that he never talked about." "Why?" "Because your genetic markers show some unusual characteristics. Nothing harmful, but patterns that suggest exposure to environmental factors that shouldn't have existed in 1944. The words hung in the air like a challenge to sanity itself. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach, a fear that had nothing to do with enemy fighters or combat missions. Doctor, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that your DNA shows evidence of exposure to radiation signatures that weren't discovered until the 1950s. Your blood chemistry indicates familiarity with atmospheric conditions that exist only at extreme altitudes, higher than any aircraft in 1944 could achieve. And your neurological patterns. What about my neurological patterns? They're consistent with someone who's experienced temporal displacement. The brain scans show activity in regions that shouldn't be active unless you've experienced significant chronological disorientation. The examination room fell silent except for the hum of medical equipment. Dr. Chen had delivered impossible news in the most clinical way possible, but the implications were staggering. Doctor, are you telling me that I've actually traveled through time? I'm telling you that every piece of medical evidence suggests that you've experienced something that science says is impossible. Your body shows the physical markers of someone who's lived through 80 years of technological advancement, but your conscious memory only covers the first 25 years. Kira slumped back against the examination table, the weight of the revelation crushing down on her. So I'm not crazy. This is really happening. Lieutenant, I don't know what's happening to you, but I can tell you that you're not crazy. You're experiencing something that's going to challenge everything we thought we knew about the nature of time, consciousness, and reality itself. In the silence that followed, both women understood that they were standing at the threshold of a discovery that would reshape human understanding of the universe. The classified briefing room 3 levels below Nellie's Air Force Base housed secrets that would never see the light of day. General Patricia Hayes, commander of Air Combat Command, studied the file that had been placed in front of her with the grim expression of someone who'd spent 4 decades dealing with impossible situations. Colonel Mitchell, I need you to explain to me how a pilot who's been dead for 80 years just landed a World War II fighter at one of our most secure installations. Mitchell shifted in his chair, his own expression reflecting the weight of a problem that had no precedent in military history. Ma'am, I wish I could give you a rational explanation. What I can tell you is that First Lieutenant Kira Volkov appears to be exactly who she claims to be. Her knowledge of 1940s military procedures is flawless. Her flying skills are consistent with extensive combat experience, and her physical condition matches someone who's been flying high-performance aircraft for several years. But the medical report says she's been exposed to radiation signatures that didn't exist in 1944. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Chen's evaluation suggests that Lieutenant Volkov has somehow experienced 80 years of technological advancement while maintaining conscious memory of only the first 25 years of her life. General Hayes leaned back in her chair, her mind processing information that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. Colonel, I've been briefed on classified projects that would make most people question their sanity. But this is something else entirely. Ma'am, if I may ask, what kind of classified projects? The kind that suggest the official history of the Second World War is incomplete. The kind that indicate we've been dealing with temporal anomalies for decades without any real understanding of their nature or implications. Mitchell felt his blood run cold. Ma'am, are you saying this has happened before? I'm saying that Lieutenant Volkov isn't the first pilot to disappear during the war and reappear decades later. She's just the first one to arrive in a condition that allows her to tell us what happened. The silence in the room was profound. General Hayes opened another file, this one marked with classification levels that Mitchell had never seen before. Colonel, I'm going to read you some names. I want you to tell me if any of them sound familiar. Captain Robert Anderson disappeared over the Pacific in 1943. Lieutenant Maria Santos lost during a bombing run over Germany in 1944. Major David Thompson vanished during a reconnaissance mission over Japan in 1945. Ma'am, I don't recognize those names. You wouldn't. They're from files that were classified so deeply that most people with top-secret clearance have never heard of them. But what you need to understand is that all of these pilots were reported missing in action during encounters with unidentified aircraft that displayed technology far beyond anything that existed at the time. Mitchell felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align. Ma'am, are you suggesting that these pilots encountered the same phenomenon that affected Lieutenant Volkov? I'm not suggesting anything, Colonel. I'm telling you that the United States military has been dealing with temporal displacement events for 80 years, and we've never had a survivor who could tell us what happened until now. The weight of the revelation settled over Mitchell like a physical presence. Ma'am, what does this mean for Lieutenant Volkov? It means that she's not just a pilot who's been displaced in time. She's a key to understanding phenomena that could reshape our understanding of the universe itself. And that makes her the most valuable asset the military has ever had. General Hayes closed the files, her expression grim. Colonel, I'm ordering you to establish a classified research program. Code name, Ghost Protocol. Lieutenant Volkov is to be given every resource she needs to help us understand what happened to her. And Colonel. Yes, ma'am. This conversation never happened. As far as the official record is concerned, Lieutenant Volkov is a test pilot who's been assigned to a classified program. The truth stays in this room until we understand enough about it to figure out what to do with it. Mitchell nodded, understanding that he'd just been handed the most important and dangerous assignment of his career. In the depths of a secure military installation, the truth about time, war, and the price of courage was about to be revealed. First Lieutenant Kira Volkov stood in the hangar that housed her P-51 Mustang, surrounded by technicians and engineers who moved around the aircraft with a reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts. The morning sun streamed through the massive doors, illuminating the polished aluminum skin that gleamed like liquid mercury despite having flown through 80 years of impossible time. "Lieutenant, we've completed the initial inspection of your aircraft," said Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief engineer assigned to the Ghost Protocol program. "What we've found is unprecedented." Kira looked up from the maintenance manual she'd been studying, a document that should have been familiar but contained technical specifications that seemed to have evolved beyond her understanding. "What kind of unprecedented?" "The aircraft appears to be in perfect mechanical condition, despite having been manufactured in 1944. The engine shows no wear. The control surfaces are aligned to tolerances that we couldn't achieve with 1940s manufacturing techniques, and the avionics." "What about the avionics?" Dr. Webb paused, his expression reflecting the weight of a discovery that challenged everything he understood about technology. "Lieutenant, your aircraft contains navigation equipment that wasn't invented until the 1960s, communication systems that didn't exist until the 1980s, and engine management computers that represent technology we're only beginning to understand today." The hangar fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft taking off from the main runway. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach, a fear that had nothing to do with enemy fighters or combat missions. "Doctor, are you telling me that my aircraft has been modified?" "I'm telling you that your aircraft represents a fusion of 1940s engineering and modern technology that should be impossible. The modifications aren't crude additions. They're integrated at the molecular level, as if the aircraft was designed from the beginning to incorporate technologies that didn't exist for decades after its manufacture." Kira walked around the Mustang, her trained eye taking in details that she'd never noticed before. The fuel system that had somehow maintained three-quarters capacity during a flight that should have exhausted its reserves. The engine that had run smoothly despite taking combat damage that should have caused catastrophic failure. The instruments that had continued to function, despite electromagnetic interference that should have rendered them useless. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Is this aircraft still airworthy?" Dr. Webb's expression grew grave. "Lieutenant, from a technical standpoint, your aircraft is more airworthy than anything we've ever examined. The question isn't whether it can fly, it's whether we understand enough about its modifications to predict what might happen if it does fly. What do you mean? I mean that the technology integrated into your aircraft appears to be designed for a specific purpose. The navigation systems are calibrated for coordinates that don't exist on any map we've ever seen. The communication equipment is configured to frequencies that we can't identify. And the engine management system is programmed with flight profiles that suggest capabilities far beyond what a standard P-51 should possess. Kira felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align. Doctor, are you suggesting that my aircraft was modified by whatever, brought me here? I'm suggesting that your aircraft represents technology that's decades ahead of anything we currently understand. The modifications aren't random, they're purposeful, designed by someone with a comprehensive understanding of both 1940s engineering and modern technology. The implications were staggering. If the aircraft had been modified by the same phenomenon that had displaced her in time, then it wasn't just a machine. It was a message, a communication from entities with capabilities that defied human understanding. Doctor, I need to fly this aircraft again. Lieutenant, with respect, I'm not sure that's wise. We don't understand the full implications of the modifications, and we can't predict what might happen if the aircraft is subjected to the same conditions that brought you here. Kira looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and somehow found the strength to keep fighting. Doctor, I've been flying this aircraft for 80 years, even if I only remember the first few. If there's a message in these modifications, if there's a purpose to what happened to me, then I need to find out what it is. And if flying the aircraft displaces you in time again, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. The silence in the hangar was profound, broken only by the whisper of air conditioning and the distant sound of modern aircraft that belonged to a world Kira was still learning to understand. In the depths of a secure military installation, a pilot who'd been displaced in time prepared to risk everything to uncover the truth about courage, sacrifice, and the price of knowledge. The briefing room buzzed with tension as Colonel Mitchell faced the assembled team of the Ghost Protocol program. Scientists, engineers, pilots, and intelligence analysts filled the chairs around the conference table, each carrying pieces of a puzzle that grew more complex with every revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with a situation that has no precedent in military history, Mitchell began, his voice carrying the